Thank you very much. We've had a really good start to the day, and I've been taking notes like crazy to follow up on at some stage with all the commitments. I'd like to start with you, Miles, just giving us a sense of where Fonterra is with the United States. We heard a lot before about how Fonterra has been growing. You seem to have got round some of the protectionist instincts in the US. Tell us about what's been achieved.
Yeah, okay. Good morning, and thanks, Fran, Simon, for having me here today. The USA is sort of fourth on our list in terms of size of market from a revenue perspective. But when you actually scratch the surface a bit further down below that, it's actually our highest returning market per metric tonne of product, which I think is a reflection of the lack of free trade agreement. Sorry to throw that in there so early, Tom. I spent a lot of time pounding the pavement in DC when I worked in the US in 2008 or 2007 to 10, in the hope of seeing TPP come to fruition. Of course, we didn't get the outcome we wanted, so we had to think differently. And so innovation for me is, I think, the key driver of where we've seen that growth. And so that's why we are now seeing significant value generated from our North American business. It's not without its challenges, but at the same time recognising the role of innovation and key customer, relationships as well.
Tell us a bit about some of those partnerships you've formed in the US.
Yeah, so it's a multifaceted relationship, unlike most of other partnership relationships with countries around the world, where it's sort of a one-way, New Zealand product into those markets. And we have formed some significant partnership in the US, using our intellectual property predominantly, to make products inside the North American border where we can't get our products in. So that's one area. Of course, they are a large technology provider that aims, of course, that you'll all know in this part of the world, to support us here. And things like probiotics, we have some partnerships around our probiotics space. And so it's multifaceted. Interestingly enough, largest importer, of course, of US dairy as well into New Zealand, which often doesn't get a lot of work. And by the way, that is done under free trade agreement back into this part of the world. So it is a two-way trading relationship that we operate, but it's multifaceted, unlike most of the other world countries we deal with.
What do Americans like about your products?
It's been referred to this morning, grass-fed. I think it's an important aspect. Our sustainability credentials. I mean, we are the lowest carbon-producing milk in the world. I've talked about that at length. That said, we are at risk of being eroded if we don't keep ahead of it. The different farming system they operate in North America and Europe is different from what we operate here in New Zealand with a pasture-based system. So there are technologies that are becoming available in that part of the world that aren't yet available here that'll be eroded. But that's a key part of it. The other piece here, when I worked there, as I say, 2007 to 10, the customer base we operate now versus then is markedly different. And that's a reflection of moving through the classes. So instead of a lower middle class customer base we operated to, as I say, in those times, to now people that are looking for high value proteins, looking for active living, ageing population, medical foods. That's the focus for us these days.
I mean, Traci, before we get on to the work you do with the Indigenous community throughout the region, can you tell us a bit about Maori business with the United States and also for your own federation?
Tēnā no tātou katoa I rungi ngā huatanguta wā renata, nei rā te mihi kia koutou Ngāti Whātua mō tō karakia mō tō mihi he whakawātea te hui nei. Huri no ki a koe, Fran, it's always lovely to see you, and I'm probably one of the few people in the room that is not afraid of you and counts you as a close friend and colleague. The US is huge, and US is critically important for Ngāi Tātou Tiwi Māori traders, and we're already trading into the US through Fonterra and other established trade routes. What Māori are starting to think about is how can we do indigenous to indigenous trade as traders and exporters in our food and fibre space, but also starting to look at how we can explore, and Miles touched on it, innovating and extrapolating value from existing goods and services.
I was struck being up in APEC to see you with a delegation, and you were celebrating a major arrangement for Indigenous people, which was kind of heroed and started here in New Zealand when we hosted APEC in 2021. Can you play out for us the evolution of that agreement and what it actually means for the 270 million odd as I understand it, Indigenous communities that are potentially there in the region.
Yeah, we've talked about the close, deep and very important relationship and partnership that Aotearoa, New Zealand and the US has had over time. The APEC is a framework of economies where we can explore that relationship. And so the APEC, when we Aotearoa hosted in feels like 2021, we were able to lead talks with other Indigenous economies to create and to conclude the Indigenous Peoples Economic Trade and Cooperation Arrangement. Now that cooperation arrangement is more than culture. While culture is critically important for us as Indigenous First Nations peoples and for us as Maori here in Aotearoa, we also recognise the importance of us as economic entities with considerable influence within our domestic economies and connected across APEC. In APEC, it's estimated that there are probably just under 500 million people of Indigenous extraction and whakapapa in the APEC Asia-Pacific region. And that means a considerable opportunity for us as business and commercially. So APEC is about wealth and prosperity. It's about focusing on how we can work together as Indigenous to Indigenous peoples, but also in partnership with our government and industry, and that's the beauty of IPECA. So far, Australia, Canada, and Chinese Taipei are partners. With the US, I'm very pleased to say, at APEC in San Francisco recently, starting to work through its own domestic processes to achieve observer status. We've established a partnership council. We're working on a 12-month work program, and I'm excited about the economic, cultural, and commercial returns that first of its kind in the world, plurilaterally mechanism can provide us.
Yeah, it was reflected on by Matt Murray, the senior US official for APEC, and also just speaking with him around the corridors, he thought it was an initiative out of New Zealand and also obviously Chinese Taipei, Australia and Canada, which they were happy to play forward. So that's an initiative from New Zealand, and I think, all praise to everyone involved in that in this room. Now to something quite different. Your business with the United States, Dawn, and people often don't think of education as a business, but it's a huge business in New Zealand, and Dawn is administering the University of Auckland. She's been a major player, and next year we'll bring Pacific Rim University leaders to New Zealand. So tell us about how you're playing us out into the global stage in the United States and regionally.
Kia ora tātou, great to be here representing our fine research, science, innovation sector at this summit. Fran, I'm going to come at your question through the theme of the summit, which is accelerating momentum. And next year, you're right, we're bringing the Asia-Pacific Rim universities here. But why 2024 is so important is because it's the 150th anniversary of the US-NZ scientific collaboration. Now in 1874, when these two nations got together to look at the transit of Venus in that small outpost, Queenstown, they actually did a lot of work together at the time looking at science and technology, and that science and technological collaboration has continued over those 150 years. And of course, that has significant impact on our economies. It has significant impact on our knowledge export industries, innovation and commercialization. And I think, Fran, your point about being in the room today is really well made, because aside from that meeting next year, which brings 60 universities across the Asia-Pacific Rim together, all in the top 100 universities in the world, 2 million students represented by those universities and 20 economies across the Pacific Rim. There's a point I want to make which relates to comments I've already heard this morning, and it's this. When we think about swagger, universities are part of that swagger. And when I talk to my colleagues in the US, they have no problem with that. They create an ecosystem. The US businesses and universities create an ecosystem where they invest in innovation and they invest together and collaborate together in seamless ways, and interdependencies exist so that you actually can't tell who is working for who. We need to get better at that in this nation, and we have a significant opportunity to do that right now. And I heard this at the Air New Zealand event yesterday, where every distinguished guest on the panel spoke about the collaboration with universities, the importance of education. And so I'm really keen for us to have the opportunity to engage in that conversation today.
Would you like to pick up now on how you see the opportunities between New Zealand and the US, Jonathan? I mean, you were up recently also in both California, but prior to that in Washington for the AMCHAM door knock.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd mention is just what Miles mentioned, is you and also previous speakers, US-New Zealand trade has gone up in the last 10 years at like close to 2 times GDP. So and 10 years ago, we actually thought that US might become sort of much less relevant to New Zealand with China, the free trade agreement with China in 2008. So that really hasn't happened. But the Miles point is what we see at AMCHAM across multiple companies, which is because the US has a lot of high-income consumers, there's a chance to sell differentiated products for much more money. So like for Xero, which is our most valuable company, the US is critical to their ongoing success, growing in the US. Or Pacific Edge, or Douglas Pharmaceuticals, or Buckley Systems. I could name maybe 10 other companies that all have strategies around high-value products. And we certainly heard this. NZTE has almost doubled resources in the US for New Zealand companies because of the opportunities in the US. So what Miles alluded to in high-value dairy is just magnified across New Zealand corporates.
Can I take you back, all of you, to the Prime Minister's comments earlier this morning, which tends to suggest a much more fast-paced, ambitious, kind of agenda for New Zealand internationally, and that's been underpinned by Todd McClay's comments, which suggest his feet will not very often touch down at Auckland Airport in the near future. I mean, what are you expecting from our ministers? What would you like to see as we want to move forward and grow the pie? And I will invite Todd back to the stage later, so you can put some comments to him at the time or some questions.
Well, firstly, from our perspective, we welcome the comments from the Prime Minister and the Trade Minister this morning. I mean, clearing the pathway, clearing the runway, if you like, for us to get on and do business. I mean, we're the ones that are close to our customers, close to the categories and the markets in which we operate. The last thing we need is the bureaucracy to get in the way once we have the market access supported. When we don't have market access supported, as we've alluded to in the US, we'd like to see those doors continue to be knocked. But at the end of the day, we don't cry in our soup or in our milk bowl, Simon. When things don't go our way, you get on and think about things differently. And to Jonathan's point, 2016, when TPP took a back step from a US perspective, we were really starting to question our business in the US. Would we downsize? Would we pull back and just have a shell office? But we decided to double down because we could see an opportunity elsewhere. So, having government support our business and not get in the way is helpful, but at the same time opening the doors that we can't as a commercial business.
Trace?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our expectation is that the Deputy Prime Minister Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Minister for Trade will do what they do best. Get out in the market, re-establish relationships, get into those partnership discussions to open the doors necessary for us to move forward. And the relationship between our ministers and the business leadership group in Aotearoa, New Zealand has always been strong and close, especially with Minister Peters and Minister McClay. So we'll expect, after a suitable settling in period, 48 hours, maybe, we'll be expecting to carry on with that. The other thing is we have some mechanisms in place now, some trade mechanisms like the Indigenous chapters in the UK FTA and the EU FTA. We've got some other Indigenous to Indigenous trading arrangements in architecture that would be really useful to give life to and get moving. So there's that. The last thing that I'll say on this is Maori exporters and traders have dual routes to market through the likes of our business leaders like Fonterra and others, and also direct channels through Indigenous. We think that that's an opportunity to leverage value and better return for New Zealand.
Thank you. And I think I would add to that I think we would like to see government take time to better understand the role of our sector in not only soft diplomacy, but the way in which we contribute to those trade relationships. So that triangulation of business, government, university sector through what it does in education, research, science and innovation. We're working with the space industry, we're working with medtech, all of these industries. We have a lot to contribute to those trade negotiations and to those relationships. And I think it's not well understood. So there's a bit of work to be done in educating around that. We have a significant increase in our exchange with US international students. We have to get better, quicker, smarter at managing those exchanges at the border.
Working for Zespri over the last 11 years as a director, one shout out I'd like to make is that MFAT and successive governments, both national-led and labor-led, have added, I'm going to say, $100 million a year to Zespri's bottom line. Between the trade deal with Korea, Japan, Europe, UK, and you can see it. I mean, as a finance person, I just don't take the company's word for it, but you can find it in the income statement. And so to echo previous speakers, we're the only developed country in the world to run without tariff barriers, quotas, and agriculture. We are a free and fair trading partner, and I think we should continue to work, as the ambassador challenged us, to not only the US, but multiple other countries on trade liberalization.
Fran, can I just pick up on Dawn? I think you mentioned, the word silent diplomacy or that soft diplomacy. There are times for soft diplomacy, there are times also to bang the table a bit. And we see that at the moment. The Canadian dairy industry in particular are really pushing up against the WTO rules, and in fact have been illegal in their export of Canadian dairy into US. And that's probably the biggest risk to our US business right now. It's actually the behaviour of the Canadians. So soft diplomacy on one hand, but also I'd like to see Foreign Affairs and Trade really bang the table to support our business.
In terms of the New Zealand story, and we'll hear a bit more about that later today, but how much does sustainability play a role in the New Zealand brand? I mean, how are we played out, particularly also in the US? Could you speak to that? Yeah.
It plays a huge role, and I think we have a fantastic position, but as I referred earlier, I think it's at risk of being eroded if we don't keep ahead of it. Technology is coming, certainly in the agricultural space, to solve some of the challenges that the world sees around methane and the like. And Northern Hemisphere has technology, have the larger farming system, hence the reason you're seeing a lot of investment go into solutions in that space. So we are at risk by being left behind because of our pasture-based system. So it's been a huge feather in the cap, if you like, to have our pasture-based system and our low-carbon producing agriculture. But that's at risk if we don't keep ahead of it, which is why, again, support from both industry and government to tackle some of these challenges is going to be important.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind commenting on that, Fran. I'd like to give two examples. So one of them is the work that we're doing with Rocket Lab through the Methane Sat, and that's a collaboration with the US where, of course, we're collecting real-time data on what's happening in our primary industries. But there's another collaboration that speaks to sustainability. So the University of Auckland is the only non-US collaborator in the US Environment Defense Agency, looking at the electrification and the decarbonisation of transport. And these are significant pieces of work that we're engaged in that speak to the issue of sustainability. And that's outside of the work we're doing as a group of 60 universities looking at the oceans that bind us and thinking about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, food security, water security, and a number of those sorts of agendas. And I think, again, these are the areas where we can really contribute, not only to trade, but also to the way in which our businesses are thinking about sustainability.
I think sustainability is the new lever for value. And it's the right thing to do, and it's also smart business. We are now responding to consumer expectations and requests and market changes, and we've done well to date in terms of what we grow, produce and sell, and we have to do better. And to the point that we're talking about here with universities, research institutes, that science, technology and innovation will give us the edge. And some of this technology we can buy and adapt. We don't always have to come up with it ourselves, which is why partnerships in country and in market with the likes of the US is so important.
You're going to COP? Tell us a bit about that. And I think you're taking they're taking you, or the other way around, the former minister and the current new minister for climate.
Well, I didn't know who was going at this point, so thank you for updating me on that, Fran. But I am going to COP next week, but with two hats, both as the Chief Executive of Fonterra, but also the Chair of Global Dairy Platform, which I'm currently in that seat. And interestingly enough, I mean, it's in Dubai, as you'll know, a large oil-producing country, and the theme of it really is around food and agriculture, and there's no, it's no surprise that they're making food and agriculture the topic of the conversation, because you know the chair sits in Dubai, where, as I say, is right in the middle of the fossil fuel part of the world. So that's going to be a challenge. We're going to have to lean into that. I think New Zealand has a good story to tell around the position we start with, but as I say, some of our efforts to date haven't been keeping up with probably the commitments that we've made going back a few years. So we are going to be in the crosshairs from that perspective. As I say, we have a damn good story to tell, and from a small nation, really doing more than enough to carry the weight of what the world's going through.
Jonathan, I mean, you've been across a range of industries in New Zealand, including aviation more recently, but give us a bit of an insight on how you see New Zealand playing as a sustainable, well-branded nation within the US and elsewhere. Do you think there's some opportunities there?
Look, yes, I think there is. They will be within limits. But so first, there's two undercurrents in New Zealand. One is we're not big enough to make a difference on sustainability, so we should really lag the leaders. And the second opposing view, which I adhere to, is we need to pick our areas for sustainability, but we have the opportunity to provide test cases and examples of how it should work. And the leading candidate, in my opinion, on that is passenger transport, because we already, and electrifying passenger transport, we're already starting with an 80% renewable network. So it's among the top in the world. And so, but we have to go not from 80 to 100, but from 80 to 135, because when you switch out of petrol into electricity, huge increase in demand. The technology is there for us to do that. And so I think pedal to the metal doing that. Not that the transition won't come without challenges and speed bumps. And it's great to hear Dawn talking about university, think tanks working. Now, the U.S. has huge amount of money going through the Inflation Reduction Act, but to engage with the U.S., we can't think of selling our stuff to them. We have to think of collaborating with them and creating jobs within the U.S., because that is how the IRA is structured. So first, huge push to be a leader on selected areas in sustainability. Second, engage with the U.S. intelligently.
The work Agri Zero is doing, I mean, that looks pretty promising, doesn't it? Is there a possibility of being able to play some of that into the US as it emerges?
I think so. I mean, clearly the focus needs to be on supporting New Zealand agriculture at the moment. They're certainly looking at the US in terms of solutions they can bring down to a pasture-based system. But I mean, it's early days, but the signs of life are looking promising at the moment.
Thank you. Just briefly before I ask Todd to come back up, what are the risks you each face within your respective industries in the US?
Yeah, well, I've referred to one quite specific to us around the role of the subsidised Canadian dairy industry, and you know, while it's specific to our industry, we shouldn't take that lightly. It has the potential to be a huge disruptor, so we're looking forward to seeing that out. And we've sort of touched on it more generally around the role of government, both here and in the markets that you operate, and making sure that they play a role of supporting businesses and clearing the runway and giving us the ability to invest with confidence without risk of legislative change taking place. That's probably the most important from our perspective.
So a big role for diplomacy.
Correct.
Traci?
Friend, for us, we're just to support Miles' point around ag and trade, that MFAC continues to do its great work and also steps in the gap when needed. For some of us as well, our FOMA members are also in tourism, and so making sure that the borders stay open, that the direct routes to market continue to do so, that wherever possible we make it as easy for our visitors and our manuhiri to come out to Aotearoa is so important. So single flights, friendly setups, making sure that it's easy to come into our country and then they can regretfully leave would be ideal. And I think support around those tourism links, especially pulling in that sustainability piece, will continue to give us the edge.
Dawn, US, China?
Yeah, well, aside from, I think that's right, really, Fran, aside from immigration settings, which are critical for us, and so I would put that on the table, the work that we're doing in maintaining our US-China relations, and we play a significant part in this. So the work that we've done in New Zealand on trusted research, protective security, really driving an agenda which helps to build the confidence in our sector, in research, science and innovation, and the education exchange, so that both, you know, the US-China relations and where we sit in New Zealand amongst that, we can all understand that we understand the sovereignty issues, we understand data sovereignty issues, but we also understand that the innovation race is upon us, and we all need to be part of that, and we all need to do that in the best values-led way that we can.
The analogy I give is, you know, New Zealand businesses can do well in a small market. And so we have a good idea, and we say we're going to go to a bigger market. And the U.S. is like a shark tank in most industries with a lot of big sharks in it. And we're the little shark that's put into the tank. And we got to be really nimble or we're going to get eaten by the big sharks. So when New Zealand businesses go into the U.S., the economies of scale in many markets that they work in, the innovation budgets of many competitors are magnitudes bigger. And you just, so you have to understand that and operate nimbly. That would be the biggest risk. But one positive thing is the U.S., for like Zespri as an example, China's such a big market for us. We are looking for diversifying markets just to sort of protect the brand in case something happens. And the U.S. is a great candidate for a diversifying market for us. So.
I'd like to invite the Minister of Trade to rejoin us and offer the panel an opportunity to reflect directly to him what they might have heard this morning, or and just ask some questions of what directly you've got him here. He's your captive.
Could I kick off?
Yes.
Will the new government have like a free trade agenda? Like, will there be countries, you mentioned, like, I think India, could we make more progress on India? But will you come in with an agenda for free trade agreements with certain countries?
Yeah, certainly. So in part of the coalition negotiations, we went through the policies of different parties. And so the document I put out with Christopher Luxon the week of the election actually focused on the deals that we think we want to progress and try and conclude over the next 3 years. India, we've spoken about a lot, it's obvious the reasons. UAE and the GCC has been sitting there for quite a period of time. I think there's some real opportunities to progress with the UAE relatively quickly, but at the same time, the GCC as a whole is a market that we have a lot of interest in, and I'll be getting up there not too far in the distant future to renew some of those acquaintances and sort of go from there. The Pacific Alliance is unfinished business. I was able to get to the point where in Colombia we launched the negotiations along with Australia and started to make progress, but actually, we need to go and revisit that. But it's a part of the world that I think can be extremely important to New Zealand in the future, in as much as what we purchase from those countries is what we want to sell them, particularly in the services space, and so that too is a priority. There's many other agreements you might look to upgrade and so on, and the list could be very, very long, but if we can bite off much of that in a 3-year period, I would have thought that would be quite some achievement.
Minister, good to be working with you again. I mentioned in some of the responses to Fran's excellent questions around the Indigenous chapters and FTAs, and so with the new mechanisms that we've just touched on now, good question, will this government and yourself be pushing forward on Indigenous chapters to ensure that excellent Māori-owned businesses continue to have that access to market?
Well, I think the very first thing we should do is look at where those chapters that we put in place in the agreements, operationalise them and make them work very, very well, and learn from that, because there may be things that are exceptionally good, other things that you might want to do differently. And so the first, as well as talking then direct to that question about where next, the big focus and push is to operationalise and get more from the agreements we have in place, or the very strong relationships as with the US, where we may not have an agreement, but there is a lot more runs to get on the board. Traci, if it allows us to sell more, of course we would consider doing that, and why wouldn't we? But I think every part of the world is going to be different, and first and foremost, on behalf of all New Zealanders, we'll go and do the deal that we have to as quickly as we can, as long as it's high quality and actually delivers for the New Zealand economy. But making sure that Māori businesses do well in export is one of the only ways we're also going to reach that very ambitious goal of doubling trade by value within 10 years. And I was speaking about you actually on Te Karori on Monday morning. I did it yesterday, but it'll be on Monday morning, when they asked about the people we respect and want to work for. FOMA and the other organisations and so on play a really, really important part of what we need to achieve. So my approach is that actually trade is good for New Zealand. As we break it down where it makes sense, of course we would do that, but each part of the world will have to be as nimble as we've always been to get those deals.
Minister, good to meet you. Thanks for being with us this morning. I heard the Prime Minister this morning talking about the importance of productivity, innovation, skills development, universities, all of the above. How are you going to ensure that we're included not just in the discovery end of the work that we're doing in terms of trade, but in the translation, application and commercialisation end?
Yeah. Well, again, it comes back to if it allows us to make the engine go first, or why wouldn't we do it? We have a challenge around productivity in New Zealand. We talk about it so much we become less productive, and I think we need to get on with it now. If I take my agricultural responsibilities as Agriculture Minister, it's been an amazing debate about what we need to do here. When we talk about productivity, growing productivity in agriculture, the media commentators automatically think we mean just more animals. Actually, that's not it at all. If I take the point of what Fonterra has done around, carbon efficiency, actually is where there is a much better debate to be had. And so the education sector is one that has been a very important part of the economy and as far as export education is concerned. It is not anywhere near as strong as it has been or it needs to be. There are a range of reasons for that, but I think immigration settings are at the forefront of it, and so our immigration minister has that in her sights, and we'll be talking about it a lot more next year. I also think that when it comes to sort of new trade deals, wider engagement with all parts of society is very important. When I was Trade Minister, we did Trade Agenda 2030, which was focused on how we do more deals and export more. Change of government, and it was trade for all. I think the time for those documents is finished, but what came out of both of them should remain, and it's actually, whether it's from academia or the business community or the NGOs or environmental groups or labour organisations, there is a strong role for them to play. My door will always be open, but ultimately then we just need to get on and do some deals so we can sell more, because trade deals should be about trade.
Kia ora.
Miles?
He smiled at that last one.
I was thinking about the advocacy around the FTA. I mean, it is actually quite remarkable. I remember the, when TPP fell apart, the sort of sense of gloom around the industry, but by gosh, the ingenuity and persistence. I mean, New Zealand dairy has worked its way through a pretty extraordinary time.
Yeah, and look, we've got a history of that. I think that the industry for us is 152 years old now, and so we have to continue to innovate. 95% plus of our product goes into the markets, and the markets are always in turmoil. I think it was mentioned earlier this morning that that's the world we live in, and geopolitics and trade barriers and supply chain disruptions and tsunamis, whatever it may be. That's the world we live in, and we've always had to innovate to get through. So we just see it as another challenge. It's not a challenge that we wouldn't have to lean into. I mean, if there's a silver lining to it, with the heavily subsidised industries that you see in North America and Europe in the agricultural sense, it means they're stymied for innovation. They don't need to think, because there's someone in central government that's going to give them a check. And so for us, that's a silver lining, because it gives us the ability to innovate and get ahead of them. So while we certainly advocate for free trade, we advocate for reducing subsidies in the agricultural sector globally, at the end of the day, we also see an opportunity to sneak in around the side by thinking outside the square.
I've just got a couple of questions from the floor, and then we'll wrap. We'll start on the one about tech, and do you consider it, and this is one for you, Todd, a more sustainable export, and with that, should there be more support enabling NZ tech businesses to focus on exporting into the US?
Well, I think it is sustainable, or they've got to make the case that New Zealand agriculture is some of the most sustainable food production in the world, both from an environmental point of view and our footprint, but also the most carbon efficient producers in the world. And so that doesn't mean we don't have an obligation to continue and improve environmental outcomes or meet carbon reduction obligations. We do, and the government is committed to that, but we've got to actually change the perception that we are, of agriculture as the solution to those challenges, a part of finding that solution. They are not the problem. So that's the first thing. But, there is huge opportunity in tech. Actually, if you look at the industries that pay their workers the most in New Zealand, it is our tech sector. And the only way we get to grow that is to being a very open economy that welcomes investment, that makes it easy for tech businesses that are New Zealand based and want to grow to get not only the capital but the skills that they need. There are far too many of them that are picking up and going to other parts of the world because they just can't get the workers here fast enough. And we've also got to get the cost of doing business in New Zealand down, because actually, a little bit like the film industry, the whole world knows that the tech sector is about to explode with opportunity. They all want it, and it's harder for us to compete sometimes. So I think the first thing we need to do is get that right within New Zealand, and we'll do well. But I'm also hugely impressed by New Zealand tech businesses that are small and how well they can do around the world. You can sell your product to hundreds of millions of people in the US and still be here in Auckland, Wellington, or come to Rotorua. I'm from there. You can set up there if you want to. But the point here, more importantly, is we need to support them. And Judith Collins has specific ministerial responsibility there. One of the things we're working through in the early days of the government, and we'll do more work on this, will come forward next year, is we talk about New Zealand Inc. and all the government approach, actually make that work. And so absolutely when it comes to opportunities in market and trade, yes, but Judith and I and others will find ways to make sure our departments are doing it together so it delivers for the New Zealand economy.
We have one final question, and I'm not sure really who's qualified on this one. It's what advice do you have for SMEs wanting to engage and get into the US markets? Anyone on that one?
A quick go then. So make sure what you're doing, you do very, very well in New Zealand. The idea that we can go overseas and export and become really, really rich is littered with companies that were great that fail. If it's hard to do business here, it's going to be even more difficult overseas. But having said that, actually, if you are focused and you know what you want to achieve and you don't try to do too much too soon, there is a lot of support there already from NZTE and others. We have so many businesses that are small that flourish and do well overseas because of that New Zealand reputation, but as the Prime Minister said, the ones that are really focused and know what they want to achieve. The world's a very, very big place, whether it's the US or Australia or China, or focus on it, do it very, very well, and if you're selling dairy products, you'll become rich.
Just to an addendum to that. Look, we're close to sort of $1.5 billion business this year in the US. So I acknowledge that we're talking from a large perspective, but we see our business in the US quite separately. And so we've probably got 7 or 8 different business units in the US, and some of them are very much in the infancy in the single $1 million digit numbers these days. And so we do think about them differently. And probably the key theme in all of that is we think partnerships is critical here. When we've gone in alone, and people always see the upside. If you go in alone and the thing is successful, you get all the returns back to you and yourself, as opposed to being willing to share. And we have a wonderful reputation, our Indigenous position, our sustainability position, the grass-fed model in an agricultural sense. And so people are looking for that. And if you can partner with someone inside the US that has a complementary skill, 1 and 1 doesn't make 3, 1 and 1 can make 10 if you're careful.
Yeah, just really quickly, I'd basket and bundle, and then I'd give Pete Crispin, the NZTE team, a call.
And can I just say, I don't think we can underestimate the importance of partnerships and building relationships, and that takes time. And I think it's also really important to recognise our point of difference in all of this, because that's actually a unique selling point that we often lose when we're going out into these sorts of markets.
Okay, we have run out of time, which is a great shame, but I really would like to thank Todd, first of all, for your generosity of coming back to the panel and giving the panel an opportunity to reflect back to you some opportunities and concerns. Miles, really terrific in the US. I appreciate the absolute passion you all had for TPP back in the day, and also, of course, we'd love the US to engage and CPTPP ambassador at some stage. We did a lot of work back then. Traci, the role of indigeneity, the growth story around that, great success in getting that placed internationally into the forums that matter, the arrangements commercially that have been made. As APEC moves to Peru, and I understand Matt Murray, the senior official, is the Sherpa for Peru for a month or so. He can't have a holiday for a while, but so he will, I'm sure, play that forward as well. Dawn, thank you for sharing the story on the business of education. We don't hear enough of that, and it's important also, I think, in the context of what we heard last night and yesterday, the role of education in New Zealand for our young people, and obviously that's a focus for the incoming government, but it's how do we keep that talent here? How do we provide people who will come into your industries here? And also, Jonathan, I was going to ask you one final question. What's your punt on the election next year?
Okay. 40% chance that Trump is reelected, 60% that Biden is reelected.
We this time next year we'll come back to that. It'll be post the election. Hey, thank you very much. Great sharing. Very different views and industries, and really good. Thank you.